What's up, anonymous writers on the internet? I am the anonymous writer Joey. I'm here today with the anonymous writer Doruk from the internet.
What's up, people?
And guess this is our first podcast, so we'll see how well things go. Obviously, first show, there's going to be some bugs, but we'll try and work our way through it. So, internet might be a little bit of a problem. Skype isn't the best. Doruk lives in a fascist country, so we'll see.
Dude, now you're gonna see a red dot on your chest.
Yeah, we'll see if Doruk can live throughout this entire podcast. But
hopefully,
if you haven't seen the first intro video, go ahead and check that out. Check out the info as well down in the description. It'll have a link to our Twitter. We occasionally tweet stuff, and we follow some interesting people. If you have any material that you want us to look at, read, and give a little bit of a review on the podcast, some free review advice, free description, free everything, the email is down below. We will definitely try and read and get as much of it as possible. We'll look for points in plot, in character development, anything that you need from there, and try and give a little bit of our own advice. Tell you what we like, tell you what we think you should improve on, and feel free to send us anything. Fiction, non-fiction, fan fiction, comic books. We will be having someone here who is an artist. She's a pretty good artist, so she can give you advice on artwork or comic books as you...
and by a pretty good artist, you mean the best artist ever?
The best artist I've ever seen, so... we can definitely get outside opinions if that's what you want. If you're deciding to write a comic book and you have some art pieces you want looked at, we can definitely get that. So we've got about 5 points here we want to go over. So why don't we get into the first one here? Doruk, you're currently writing a book as well, along with me. We're both writing fiction tales, so I guess the first question can go to you. Where do you get your ideas for plot lines?
Well, most of the time when I read a book, a novel, or even when I'm watching a movie, I try and imagine the story from the perspective of another guy. Let's say I imagine the story of Game of Thrones from the point of view of a basic, simple farmer. So I think there are a lot of ideas there. There's a goldmine there that seeing all these, like the quote-unquote end of the world stories from the perspective of somebody that might not necessarily be in the middle of the story. So I think I get a lot of my stories and plot points from there. I really enjoy looking at the story from another point of view most of the time.
Now with these essentially like minor characters or background characters, do you when you come up with your plot lines, do you push them into the main story, or do you have them have their own separate story while this story is going on? How do you like to...
Well, obviously a story that has the main character just observe some stuff wouldn't be too engaging. So I try to imagine the life of that character and the story that the minor character is the main character of, if that makes any sense.
So you kind of bring them into the main storyline, but not too much.
Kinda. I try to come up with a main story that involves them at the center. That might not necessarily be the story parallel to the story that I said, like the end of the world story, but it might just be a little minor story that has the small farmer as the main character.
Okay, so maybe not having them be maybe not having the consequence of their story if they fail be so big, but still
Yeah.
something that's intriguing enough to follow along, and you can still kind of root for them.
Yeah, kinda. I guess what I'm trying to say is I try to focus on like a Hufflepuff student throughout the Harry Potter series
Ah,
that might struggle with his exams and stuff, and that might have his own personal problems. I try and explore that point of view.
okay. I mean, that's definitely a very creative spot to look at, and something that can be creative and observed upon that I don't think a lot of mainstream books kind of cover is that what the story is in the background. Obviously every universe that's created, you're not going to have this massive expansion of stories that covers everyone there, and there's a lot of ideas that can be gained from something like that.
Yeah, I guess I kinda like to explore the life of the small guys.
Yeah, I think a good example of stories like that would be something from the Star Wars what was the expanded universe. They go into a lot more depth on different characters, and obviously the main story arc of Star Wars is from the movies, but knowing about each individual character, knowing about how things got to here based off of what this character did and what this character did, and they might get a brief cameo in the movie. I think the Star Wars expanded universe has proven that if you have a good universe, you can definitely do something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I haven't necessarily read too much of the expanded universe, but that's the primary reason that I'm really excited about Rogue One coming out. Because, like, the main story, that Luke Skywalker is not gonna die, probably. I mean, the good guys are gonna win eventually, but in Rogue One, we have no idea who these characters are. We have no idea if they will make it through the film. So I think it adds a excitement to the bigger story in picture.
Mm-hmm. Alright, for me, I enjoy writing about, big universes. I like creating a giant universe of endless possibilities, and try and create a universe that I have control over, but at the same time there's so much room for expansion and thought about what could happen. I try to find a balance in between there, but one of the great ideas that I get my plot lines from is going along and just kind of searching through searching through internet pages and different spots and finding things like conspiracy theories. I think the reason conspiracy theories get so popular is because it's obviously just a great story that somebody's telling, and it's obviously, whether it's true or not doesn't really matter for your creative fiction story. If you can tailor that into your universe, you can turn it into, I think, something that's really good. Examples of these, you don't want to go with the insane Alex Jones conspiracy theory where there's like vampires taking over the world, but
like the Secret Serpent Society or stuff.
I mean, you can like Serpent Society is something that you might be able to take advantage of, but something like a secret society kind of running things is something that you can take and create a little universe from. I think, but some of the more ones that some of the better conspiracy theories that you can use are stuff that you would believe could, like, when you first hear them, maybe you dismiss them, and then it plays again in your head, and then you go, maybe that actually might make sense, and then you think about it again, like, no, it couldn't be, and you just kind of go back and forth. So, I guess I can give two examples of stuff that's inspired me for stuff in my book that I'm currently writing. One of those happened in your country, that coup. Obviously the theory that's going on there is that the coup was faked. Now we don't.
Yep.
We
That
don't.
it was a theater, basically.
Yeah, that it was fake to gain to gain more political power, and to rid himself of for Erdogan to rid himself of political enemies. Now, that's clear. That's a conspiracy theory right now, but it's something that you look back and you say, maybe, and you look at it again, maybe not, and it just keeps going back and forth, and it keeps playing in your mind. And that's a story I feel like, if you're writing something about, a politician or someone trying to gain power, that's definitely a great way to tell that story. And I feel like that would be something that's good. Another one I've used was there was something in the U.S. recently with one of the presidential candidates. Hillary Clinton was under investigation for an email scandal, and there was a conspiracy theory that kind of came out from one of the political pundits that I listened to, and his thing was, this is probably something that the rest of the Democratic Party is going to use to secure the election. They're going to use this, they're going to have her indicted so they can take her off the front card and they can put somebody else who's more likable in there. They won't have to run this huge race. They can go in, it can be someone who the whole, the party can unite behind, and they can take the election. Now that didn't happen, so it's obviously a conspiracy theory, but it's a great idea. It's a great story that can kind of grip you. You can essentially write an entire book about that.
You could write a series of books about that.
Essentially you could. It's a great thing of just exploring how things would work in the back with, you've got two people competing against each other, and essentially you could write it where one or the other side are the good guys, and or you can write them that they're both just, these, not, instead of black and white characters, you can make them gray characters. So I think conspiracy theories are something that you should take a look at if you're a creative writer and you're trying to find something to make a good plot from. I think that's actually a really good opportunity to, grab stuff.
I really think that the aspect of conspiracy theories that you talked about, the going back and forth, are a really basically goldmine of ideas, because you would be surprised how many people in Turkey believe that the coup was actually fake. So it's really a divisive thing, actually. A lot of people believe it, a lot of people don't believe it, but there's no definitive answer, so it's really interesting to explore.
Yeah, obviously the more outlandish your book is, the more crazy a conspiracy theory you can base it off of. Obviously if you're going to write a book about vampires, vampires in real world and trying to, create a way to hide them or something like that, you can go with some of these more outlandish conspiracy theories. But if you're trying to keep it within reality, then I think you kind of want to keep your conspiracy theory a little more tame.
I totally agree.
So, I think those are both, very creative ideas for you guys to go out and, if you're kind of loose on what your plot is, loose about a subplot, or loose about, you've got this idea, but you don't really know how you want to take it, or you've got this world that you've kind of created, but you don't know how to take it, and how to carry it from point A to point B to point C. You can go and you can read, already established books and kind of just imagine a minor character in there and what their story would be, as Doruk had mentioned. Or you can go and, like I said, just, there's thousands upon thousands of conspiracy theories out there. And
dude, you can literally get lost for hours on the internet between conspiracy theories.
You can go and you can just look up these conspiracy theories. You don't have to believe any of them. You can just click through them and find ones that just kind of catch your eye. Like, okay, that's starting to like, you know, depending on how you want to write your book. If it's like a really out there book of, you know, insane vampire fan fiction, then, you know, by all means, go and find the darkest places on the internet where, like, everyone's laughing at that conspiracy theory because it clearly can't be true. Go in and read it and try to get some ideas from it, you know. Essentially, it's I feel like it's an easier way to kind of use material because, you know, obviously if you're going to recreate the Lord of the Rings, and instead of rings it's going to be necklaces, and you're going to make like 10 characters or stuff, people are going to look at you a little funny. But, you know, if you're going to make, you know, if you're going to take some conspiracy theory about, you know, Donald Trump being a secret, you know, a secret Democrat sent to help rig the election, that's something that can be a little more believable in your believable story, and you can base something off of that. So there's conspiracy theories do have some help there. So I think we got the first question answered pretty nicely, so we'll go on to the next one.
Alright.
Doruk, what's something that's inspirational for you? Where do you get inspirational material from? What's your favorite source for that?
Well, like I said, I like to imagine the life of different characters in any form of media I consume, and I'm a real people's watcher. So whenever I just go to a coffee shop or a patisserie or anything, I just can sit there for hours and look at people, try to come up with stories for them, what they're upset about, what they're so happy about, maybe what they're crying about. So I think that's one of the inspirations for me, to watch just random people on the street, I guess.
So,
and another inspiration I'd say is some probably science fiction stuff, because I feel like you can have a lot of derivatives from that. You can change a simple plot point and the story becomes a whole lot of different. So I think that's really inspiring for me. To sum up.
So, you know, from what I gathered there, one of the big inspirational points for you is just people watching, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think that's a great spot for that I think a lot of writers should be using if they don't use it already. You know,
I mean, the way I see it, everybody's life is a story that has them as the main character. So it's really fun to try and solve the puzzle and the mystery of how people's lives might have been and are going to be. So I really enjoy doing that, actually.
I think that is
and
actually
being a little creep.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good idea to just kind of explore how that would work. So, for me, something I use for inspiration is going out and finding not necessarily the major historical events, but minor historical events that you wouldn't know about unless you went out of your way to find them. You know, one of those, a good example of that is, you know, the Battle of Thermopylae, I believe it's called, the thing that 300 was based off of. Because I mean, honestly, you wouldn't have known about it if that graphic novel wasn't created, and that graphic novel took this story, this kind of legend about 300 Spartans who held off this giant Persian army. They touched it up a bit. You know, they obviously made these Spartans like borderline Super Saiyan, and obviously increased the Persian number and the death rate, but like to the point where it's more fiction, but it's based off of a real event, and they were able to create this amazing story based off of this minor historical event that I don't think many people would even know about without the movie. So, I think
I really agree that the smaller historical events are more of an inspiration than the rather big events, because Like, there are a lot of stories, books, movies, and stuff that try to storm through like a century in 10 minutes, which I think is a little bit of a cop-out. You can just take a month of history and build upon that a lot more. So I think there's a lot more creative flexibility for that thing.
I mean, the other thing that I feel like huge historical events just don't get the same inspiration as minor ones is because people have heard those stories for so often. The invasion in Normandy. How many documentaries? How many movies? There's countless documentaries of the invasion of Normandy from basically every perspective. You've got the inflatable army that was fooling Hitler and the German army to thinking they would land in Calais. There was the spy and the counter spies from Britain, and then you obviously Saving Private Ryan had that opening scene with the invasion of Normandy. That's three things I can list without doing any research about it, and that's one of those huge historical events. But how many stories could be written about Roman, like early Roman, the early Roman Empire, when they were still just kind of conquered, when they still just had Italy conquered, and they were fighting off other empires at the time. There's so many battles and stuff from there that I couldn't tell you anything. I couldn't tell you anything about it without researching it a little more. I've seen one thing about it because I went out of my way to look at it to try and get some inspiration for it. And there's a lot of stuff there that you can look at.
I also think it ignites a lot more curiosity in the consumer, in the reader.
Oh yeah.
Because when you see like a book about World War One, like you have a pretty good idea about how it turned out, but when you see like something smaller, like you said, it flashes some curiosity about, holy shit, what did this guy write 200 pages about this thing?
Yeah, I mean, people don't want to hear a story they've heard over and over again unless it's a really unique way of saying it. But a creative writer who probably is still learning how to create the best book, starting on something that everybody's read it's not going to get them inspired to create more. It's not going to create a fan base. And I feel like going after something like a minor battle, creating even just a decent story based off of it. You can even do like a fiction that almost reads as a non-fiction. Find some conflict. Find some conflict with the Ottoman Empire. Obviously in their early days, pardon me, in the early days, when they conquered the Middle East, there were still uprisings in like present-day Syria and Iraq and stuff like that. Just tell the story of someone uprising in there. Like find some information, learn a little bit about that, and then just pop a character in there. Pop a character that can be relatable into that situation, and you have yourself a story there. That's, if you can write a decent, you limit the competition of who you're going up against with that. There's not going to be many people talking about the Syrian uprising against the Ottoman Empire in like the 1500s or something like that, or the 1700s. There's not going to be many of those, so you don't have to necessarily write the best story about it. You can just kind of write a creative story with a unique background. And I feel like minor historical points that haven't been touched upon are great ways for people who haven't yet told the story to kind of write something about that. And obviously taking historical events from the past and upgrading them to the present day or even the future. If you want to go more sci-fi, sci-fi movies or sci-fi stories generally have a certain thing you have to establish, but tailoring your story to a future with a story that's already happened in the past is a very easy way to create a sci-fi story.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things to be explored in minor historical events compared to like a bigger battle or something. There are a lot of aspects that maybe the war hasn't been explored yet, so you can just create a lot more content, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So, before we go on to the next 3 parts, we'll take a quick break right here and continue again with the final 3 parts, and then we'll be done with our first podcast. So we'll see you guys after the break. And we're back. So we got our first 2 points down, so we'll move on to the 3rd point here. So, obviously we started this podcast because we're authors, or hopefully authors. Hopefully we finish, we get our story sets, and hopefully publish them somehow. So, Doruk, care to explain the project you're currently working on?
Well, I haven't got a name for it yet. It's more of a concept at the moment. Mm-hmm. So what got me into this concept is basically, I was thinking about, like I said, smaller stories, because I really enjoy it when I read something about a really small thing that explores it from different aspects. So I thought, what is one of the basic things that makes humans differentiate themselves from basically animals? And what I came up with is basically feelings. I think it differentiates us even more than our intellect. So I thought, what would happen in a society that feelings were basically taken away from humans? So that's the cornerstone of my story at the moment. I will try to explore a society that feelings are forgotten/forbidden. The details are still being worked on, so that's the basic idea of it.
Okay, and is there any spots that you're looking at right now for inspiration?
Well, the first time I got this idea, I thought I was subconsciously being inspired by 1984, and then upon your recommendation, I started reading The Giver. It also has a lot of similarities with the ideas I have. And as much as I am not too proud that I have read it, I think Divergent has a lot of common things with my story as well. I'll try to basically deprive my story from all those books by going to a little bit of extreme. In all those books, feelings or individuality are most of the time forbidden, or they are portrayed in a certain point of view that was put into the society by someone else. I'll try to basically deprive humans of feelings completely.
Okay, so your way of differentiating the story, aside from like different characters and perhaps a different plot line, is taking it to an extreme that it's not been taken to before.
Yep, and I believe that is going to allow me to explore what feelings really mean to humans. When I take it to the extreme, I feel like a character maybe feeling something for the first time, is going to have a lot more impact than a character uprising in any other story. So there's that.
Alrighty.
What about you, man?
I actually got inspired a little bit to create this. I've got a bunch of different projects that are kind of in the works, but at the moment, my big story that I'm kind of going with is essentially it's how to take the Game of Thrones style writing and combine that with a bunch of other things that I've enjoyed, stories that have hooked me to the point where I keep going back for more, no matter what it is. Combining, obviously combining the Game of Thrones writing would be something that's just popping around and finding characters.
And quick question, by the Game of Thrones style writing, do you mean like jumping from character to character, or more of a literature sense?
Well, the way I would describe the Game of Thrones is you're not following one main character and having a story with minor characters happening around there. You have going from character to character, developing them as a first person, and making each of these characters a potential main character and the good guy in their story. They're the good guy in their story. They've got some reason to try and move up, to try and complete whatever goal they have. So my idea when coming up with this is, try and give these characters a reason for what they're doing, so that you don't get introduced to this guy and it's just like a black or a white character. Is he's a good guy or he's a bad guy? No, it's he's doing it for this reason. He's got this reason to do something, and just try and give him a little sympathy. I feel like Game of Thrones has been able to do that very well with most of their characters that you follow. Most of the people you've seen first person, like even in the show, which is obviously the more popular one. But I can't attest too much to the books, but one of the main examples is, you've got Cersei Lannister, who, obviously, spoilers ahead, she's got, she's killing people left and right, she's, betraying, cutting people behind, and from an outside perspective, which is where a lot of people look at it, she's the bad guy, she's a bad guy, and you want to root against her, and conventional storytelling, or the way storytelling has been, kind of says, yeah, she's the bad guy, you should root against her. But the way that the Game of Thrones is kind of told, the perspective it's told from, she's got these 3 kids, and she's got her brother, and that's all she cares about in this world. She wants to simply protect them and raise them and be this mother lion that will coddle and baby her kids forever. And it's kind of a tragic story to how she gets there. Her first son is killed, and she doesn't know how he was killed, but she coddled him so much and created him into a monster that ended up creating the wrong enemies who killed him. And she's obviously mourning for him, and the Dornish end up killing her daughter, who didn't even, she's never really wronged them. She was very little to not even born when the rebellion took place. She was very little, so she had nothing to do with what the mountain did. She has no control over him. And then, she picks her champion as the mountain because she wants to win and she wants to, get justice for her firstborn. And it turns out that the Prince of Dorne goes up against them and dies. And now Dorne holds her responsible for something that she really didn't do. And she takes her daughter from her, and then her final son, her last son that she wants to hold on to, is just being taken away from her by everything, and everything she tries to do to get her son back ends up hurting her even more. And then she feels like she's put in a corner and has to go to this extreme to get her son back, and it ends up losing her son forever. And now I'm interested to see how it goes from there, but I'm guessing if that's a tragic story and you can feel sad for her. And I feel like the Game of Thrones style writing is something where you just kind of create sympathy for every character and every decision they make. They're trying to become the good guy, and some of them work out, some of them don't. And
I totally agree with that, actually, because I think one of the main reasons Game of Thrones was so successful is that almost all of the characters are neither black or white. They are all always in the gray area, which I really think creates sympathy for quote-unquote bad guys, even though there are no definitive bad guys in the story. And also maybe a little bit of hatred towards the good guys as well. They are not always the perfect knight on the white horse. So I really think Game of Thrones does a really good job of creating empathy through all its characters, and that might have a huge correlation between the writing style.
So that's what I try to go for with my writing style. But then, one of the things I like is Star Wars. So I tried to incorporate some Star Wars with that. I also enjoyed, mob movies. There's Goodfellas. There's The Sopranos, which came out on HBO. There's The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2. Some of the books there as well are really great. I've read some of those, and I like that. So in this kind of universe, I can create some of those characters. I can bring them into my universe. I guess this kind of I don't know if you know about it too much in Turkey, but in the United States there's a lot of this feeling that corporations are these big mysterious things that are trying to take control and trying to take control of our lives, and they're trying to control everything. They're trying to make insane amount of profits and screw people over. And
I mean, we were talking about conspiracy theories earlier, and in Turkey most people actually believe that these corporate companies are actually the ones running the country at the moment. So
yeah, I mean that's an example of a conspiracy theory that's very believable, that I took and I used that. I've sat around. I've enjoyed some anime as well. So I took two popular animes that I like. One being Naruto and one being Dragon Ball Z, and I shoved them into there. The political world is always fascinating, despite how some people may tell you they don't care. As soon as they kind of read into it, and as soon as you make it a little interesting, then people can start caring. And I think I'd put religion in there as well. I think religion.
Yeah, definitely.
I think you can have a story about fanatics, and I think that's another thing that can definitely create a good story. So I just put all those together, and now I can just kind of control, what happens. How does this work? How do they all go together? And just, it can be a very simple thing that brings them all together, but the art of it is, the fun of the story is building up to how this happens, and then telling, after the climax, just kind of telling how things go out from there and what confrontations come after this huge, galaxy-changing event. So that's
Yeah, like your story is obviously a huge universe. Like you said, it has a lot of different aspects of different stories.
mhm.
So I'm really excited to see how they are going to play off of each other, how they are going to interact. So I think that's going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah. I guess are there any regrets you have going with your project?
I wouldn't say regrets. I mean, as I feel in a lot of things in my life, I probably should have been a little more organized creating this universe at the first place. But I don't think there are any creative stuff that I'm regretful of right now.
Yeah, I would say for me, I kind of wished I got onto one of my minor stories first and just kind of written it through and just known, okay, this is what worked, this is what didn't, and then kind of just build up to this. Because this seems like it's probably my biggest or second biggest idea that I've got going right now. And I kind of wish I had the bug to write something else before writing this, but, just the opportunity just to have this idea in my head just kind of keeps me going there. So I kind of got to hope I hit fire right away. But we'll move on to our next one, our fourth point here. All right, so obviously most of our potential, our hopeful audience here is our creative writers who aren't really established yet and just want to create work on their own for other people to see. So what would be your advice to them? What would you want them to write that would make you want to read it?
I mean, probably my main advice would be to go for it. Just, if you have an idea, just try to build around it and don't feel discouraged because it might maybe look similar to another thing, or because if you think it's worthless. You just gotta power through the hesitations and try to come up with something, and then it's going to write itself at some point, I believe. If you create an idea, the subplots or the characters are just going to find this place in the main idea. So I think that's one of my biggest advices, just to create the idea that you are going to write about, and then go from that main idea and try to branch it out later on.
Okay, and then if you were just scrolling through, Amazon or any like independent sites that advertise works by some of these independent authors, what would grab your interest? What would grab you? What would make you sit down and give this book a chance and start reading it?
Most probably something along the lines of indie sci-fi, maybe a little bit of thriller inside it, because I really feel like science fiction allows people to really exert their ideas to the outside world, and I really enjoy anything that sci-fi that's not very huge budget or very well known, that are consumed in the last couple of. For example, the last series I watched was called Stranger Things. I don't know if you watched it. Now, obviously, it wasn't like a college project or something. It had a decent budget, but it was a really cool, small story about a group of friends in the 80s. And it was really enjoyable to see how people can interpret very simple ideas, making them into the sci-fi thing I'm talking about. So probably indie sci-fi is my jam.
Okay. For me, I would say the biggest thing for writers that I've noticed that would be when you're going to build something. Obviously, what you said, just to publish it and don't get discouraged as you're writing it, because it might be better than you think. But my big thing is figure out who your audience is. Are they going to be younger kids who need stuff to be force-fed to them, or will they be smart enough to pick up on things? And find a balance between being too vague and being and thinking your audience is too stupid to pick up. Find that balance right in between, because that's something that that I think catches a reader. Something that you see something later on in a plot point or something like that, or something major, or something even minor that that a character undergoes, and then you go, and then if the story's good enough, they recall back to, oh, I remember that. I remember this thing happening. I remember this minor detail that he mentioned, and I think if you mention it and if you kind of explain it enough to where it's to where when you bring it up again, it's good, but you don't force feed it enough to where the audience member is almost insulted by how dumb you think they are, that it's so obvious that it's going to come up at like later in the end. Don't put a sign, like essentially don't put a giant sign around this detail that's like saying foreshadowing and just like blinking lights of foreshadowing coming at you, but kind of hide it where it's just like a small print at that bottom of the page with like the little asterisk next to it, like this is important. Like, just kind of keep your detail like that, where it's like this is a minor detail that maybe gets skimmed over in a fast read, and then they see it later on, and it maybe shocks them, like a newer reader, and it doesn't really shock an older reader, but you bring it in nicely. I feel like finding the balance between that is a great way to keep your audience engaged.
I mean, as for the details, I really agree that they should be subtle, because like if there are some certain story points or twists maybe that are too on the nose, it's just gonna look absurd in the story. So I think the story should evolve naturally while you try and shape it into what you're trying to make it at the end.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as an independent work that would kind of grab my idea, as of someone who writes a huge, or is trying to write a huge fantasy book, like sci-fi fantasy book, I think something for me that would grab my attention is a fantasy world that I could that's creative enough that I can get myself sucked into this world. I like someone to take a chance. I'd like it, maybe if somebody goes and takes a chance in creating a world. Maybe the world isn't explained as well as it could be, or maybe he leaves a lot unexplored, or he explores too much of it and it doesn't leave a lot of room for imagination. But I would take more of a chance on somebody who creates this epic world rather than somebody who creates just this small world that you have to live in. And it could be a really well written plot, but if it's something that you just can't get sucked into, then I would probably give the benefit of the doubt to the guy who's taking a chance.
Okay, so here's a quick question for you. Have you ever read The Inheritance Cycle?
I have not. Is that
It's Aragon, eldest, Brisinger, and stuff.
I'll actually have to take a look at that.
I definitely recommend that, actually. I mean, I realize that there are some certain plot point issues or story issues at some books, but I think the universe you're really gonna enjoy. I definitely recommend it.
Alrighty, and for our final point, this kind of goes a little more on the fun side. What TV show would you want to write for or recreate?
Okay, so apologies in advance if I go into a little bit of a rant about this, because this is an issue I'm really passionate about, actually. I definitely want to be a writer for the show Arrow. That's basically the show of Green Arrow, the comic book character. Now, my history with this show is quite funny. I was a huge fan of Green Arrow as a comic book before the show even got aired, and I fell in love with the first 2 seasons. I definitely would not change a single thing about the first couple seasons. The casting, the pace, the storylines, it was just so beautiful. And then I have no idea what happened. In the 3rd season, they just totally fucked it up, which I was really angry about, because I had grown a connection with the show during the first couple seasons, and then when it got into the mess it is, I was actually really kind of heartbroken against the showrunners. So another thing I'm really angry about the show is how they fucked it up, because Green Arrow is obviously not one of the most popular characters. He's not a Batman or Superman, obviously. So he had a pretty shallow pool of stories to pull from, and they basically made him into Batman in the TV show, which really got me angry. They basically took stories from Batman and they just wrote it off Batman and wrote Green Arrow in his place,
All
which
right.
really got me angry because it was basically not creative. They could have just came up with such a better story. So I could go on for hours about Arrow, so
All right.
there's that.
I'll ask you a quick follow-up question to that. Then,
Okay.
what would you do to change?
I'm gonna assume that I'm the showrunner of season 5 at this point, the upcoming season.
Oh no. You can go and recreate it. What would you do from season 3 to season 5? How would you change it?
Now, I totally scrap season 3 and 4 as they are. I would definitely not use those storylines. I think one of the problems of Arrow is expanding the universe really fast. I mean, in second season they introduced a lot of characters, which were actually essential to the Green Arrow character, whether it be Black Canary or Red Arrow and all that. So I think I'd maybe slow down a little bit during season 3. I mean, you don't kill your like main single character in season 3 mid-finale. Spoilers, sorry for that.
Go. Spoilers are welcome.
I'd probably try and make the stories a little more self-contained, a little less worldwide events maybe, which I think are the stories that Green Arrow actually shines, because, like I said, he's not a Batman or Superman, he's just a guy with a bow and arrow that has expert marksmanship, and I think he should really focus on smaller things that happen in his city instead of just going mental.
Kind of going off of your creating them as like a Batman kind of character, would you be okay if they brought in like a Batman or like one of the Robins or Nightwing and had him, like, them both kind of conflicting on their viewpoints but still fighting on the same side? So
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'd love that. For example, in season 2, mid-season finale, I guess it was, they basically introduced Barry Allen, the Flash, which is a huge character in the comics, and it actually worked because it didn't show the way on how to run Arrow. It became its own show later on, but the character didn't impact Arrow so much that it changed the show itself. So I'd really enjoy, like, let's say a Nightwing, which would make sense because he's basically a human as well. I'd really like to see a confrontation of Nightwing or Robin or even Batman to a certain point that happens in Arrow, but I don't want Arrow to become Batman, if that makes any sense.
Alright, for me, I would like to write for Game of Thrones. I think I wouldn't want to be a main writer. I'd want to be someone kind of on the side, just writing different things and kind of pitching it to the main writer. Now, I kind of have more of a selfish reason than what you have, because I wouldn't want to change the show. I would want to go on from season 1 and go there, because I feel like, since I enjoy the way that the story of Westeros and of the world that George R. R. Martin created, that, like, the way he wrote it, that I would want to write like that. I would want to write something for, or I want to write that kind of story. So, to kind of be there and see, the show writers, how they construct everything, how they create the dialogue, how they write down everything like that, including George R. R. Martin, because he does one episode every season. He is a main writer for that, and I think just the experience alone of seeing how he constructs everything together, of seeing, this was what was pitched, this is what he took, this is why he took it, I feel like he would say, this is good, but we just can't fit it into, like, the 50 minutes or the 55 minutes, because that could be something like, okay, this worked, it just can't go into the show because of time restraints, or he goes there and he says this doesn't work and here's why it doesn't work, and that's something that I feel like learning from that would be just an amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think writing for Game of Thrones would be so interesting since you already have a huge universe to work on.
I mean, you have that universe to work on, but the other thing about it is, creating the dialogue to kind of because in a TV show and a movie, you can't say how people are thinking. You can't really break that fourth wall. This is not a show that's written to break the fourth wall. So kind of writing for how people do that, I think that would help me create better dialogue and would give me a better position or a better problem to have. Instead of how do I make this work, it's what of this dialogue that I've thought of for my characters can I put into an action and not lose anything.
Besides that, now is probably like one of the best times to be a showrunner on Game of Thrones, since the dependency on the books are now over and the show is free as its own.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something else. Obviously there's an idea of how the show and the show writers probably know a little bit more about it, but
Yep.
learning how you get from where they're at to the end point with no help as well. I think if I started from season 1 and stayed on all the way through to the end, I think I would get just so much experience from there, and I feel like that would be a great show to be a part of.
I mean, going all the way back to the first point, I'd probably enjoy writing an episode for Game of Thrones that is more of a spin-off. Like, I'd really enjoy writing an episode of, let's say, a prostitute, and basically explain her life throughout the world of Game of Thrones. So,
I mean,
I don't know, I feel like that.
There's a lot of stuff that's still kind of left unexplored, or I feel like maybe something that would be interesting for you is maybe not like a prostitute, but writing about, some of the things that Sir Arthur Dane has done, or writing about Sir Barrington Selmy. I mean, that would be something that George R. R. Martin has described what he's done, but he hasn't, I might be wrong on this, but I don't think he's gone into full detail about, Sir Barrington going in solo and rescuing the Mad King from captivity. I don't think he's gone into full detail, and I think, if you want to write like an old school spy espionage, that could be something that's like right there. And then
it would be really interesting to read now that I think about it.
And then, if you create something like that, you'd obviously have to submit it. That can either be an awesome fan fiction for you fan fiction people. That would be awesome. That would be something awesome there. And I think, or it could be like, submitted to George R. R. Martin to be like included in his universe, and you get, tips and what George R. R. Martin thinks. And I think that'd be a huge boost. So I think right here, I want to put out a little challenge to anyone who's made it this far. If you've watched Game of Thrones before, and and you're a little bit of a fan, I want you to just give a little bit of, I want you guys to come up with an idea of something that would be an awesome fan fiction to write about. Doruk's given us the idea of a prostitute, and I gave the idea of Sir Barrington Selmy going in to rescue the Mad King. So, if you've got an idea for a fan fiction in there about something that would be awesome, let us know, and that'll be the first thing we talk about in our next podcast. We'll bring up your name, and we'll give your idea, and we'll give you a little shout out. So
I actually really like that challenge, Ben. I can't wait to see what people come up with.
Yeah, so if you guys don't come up with anything, or if there's no one who comes up with anything, then we'll have to come up with something on our own. But I want to see some people come up with something. So, you know, if you're watching this on an Amino, you can comment down below with your fan fiction idea. If you're watching this via YouTube and you found this on there, or you found it via SoundCloud, our email is anonymouswritersontheinternet@gmail.com. We'll take all submissions for that and try and get them in before the next podcast. So, I think that's it from us. I think we got about an hour's worth in there. So,
Yep, something right there.
we'll see you guys in the next podcast. Thanks for listening.
It was really fun, people.
See ya.
Hey, getting some writing done there, buddy?
Yeah, setting up in public so everybody can watch me type my big screenplay.
Me too. All real writers need to be seen writing, otherwise what's the point, right?
You should totally write that down.
Okay, will you watch me?